Well, hello everyone and welcome to this World Economic Forum special event. My name is Dan Murphy and I'm CNBC's anchor and correspondent based right here in Dubai. We're so happy to have you all joining us in the room, and I also want to start off by welcoming our panel for today as well. Please, ladies and gentlemen, make them feel welcome. Welcome to everyone joining us online as well. We're going to have a really insightful conversation into a key topic that I'm sure a lot of you have been thinking about for some time now. It's called regulation. And today we're asking whether or not regulation is a friend or a foe. I personally think there is no better place to have this conversation. The UAE has been building its reputation on moving fast and shaping policies before most other countries even realize that the race has begun. Across the region, what we're seeing is really interesting as well. The ambition in tech and AI is running at warp speed, and of course, regulatory gaps also remain. But the IMF also just warned that around the world, most countries still lack the regulatory and ethical foundations to manage AI responsibly. So keep that in the back of your mind as our conversation continues. So the question we're going to be debating today is, can regulators really keep up when technologies are evolving faster than the rules designed to manage them? Joining me in the circle today is Her Excellency Mariam Al Hamadi. She's the UAE's Minister of State and Secretary General of the Cabinet, leading the charge to make the government faster, smarter, and ready for the AI era. Professor Hiroki Haruka is a leading scholar from Kyoto University focused on how law and technology intersect. Jack Hidary is here. He's the CEO of Sandbox AQ. He's a pioneer in AI and quantum technology. He's got a hot take on this. And Rachel Adams is the founder and CEO of the Global Center on AI Governance, focused on helping governments around the world turn AI principles into policy. So thank you all again for being here. Your Excellency, I'll turn to you first because I know you've been thinking about this deeply as well. Give us the local perspective here. How is the UAE balancing this approach to innovation and regulation in the AI race?
Thank you, Dan, for giving me the chance today, and thank you for my esteemed panelists today. In the UAE, we look to the regulation as a friend. The same thing, we also look to it when it risks becoming a foe. Our leadership was having a clear vision. You should look to the regulation not only as a friend. Actually, it should be a trusted partner in your journey. The UAE founding father, the late Sheikh Zayed, once he said, our goal is to ensure justice in our journey and in our community, and uphold what is right. And that's become our compass. And that's why we look to the regulation not as a barrier. However, we look to the regulation as a bridge to progress, prosperity, and justice, the same thing. However, you can look to the regulation also as a barrier or a friend. It depends on how you deal with it. When the regulation can be a friend, actually, whenever it is clear, when it is transparent, when it is adaptive by design, and the same thing, it has a global perspective. And let me, Dan, give you some clearance about this one. Emerging technology from the AI to quantum computing is moving very fast, and it will not wait for your laws and regulation systems to catch up. And that's why we have to plan earlier to this one. And that's why we scan the horizon. We see the new emerging technologies. We see also the investment flow, stock market changes, the policy makers shift, and all the opportunities and risk that we can see it. And based on that one, we build flexibility in our legislation system so it can adapt and at the same time will not expire. We have learned from our journey that adaptive regulations always will be relevant and always will keep the trust in your system alive. And this is how we are working, and that's why Clarity is very important in our ecosystem. That's why we co-design our regulations with all our stakeholders, whether they are academians, NGOs, business, government, startup. So they are part of our ecosystem that we are building in the UAE.
Your Excellency, let me follow up and ask you as well, more specifically, as you regulate, given the pace of innovation, what would you say is the single biggest challenge that you're facing today at the government level?
Is actually because we are a federal government that has federal and 7 local emirates. So the coordinations to ensure that all our stakeholders are aligned with us whenever we approve our legislation is very important. And second thing is how to make it adaptive to what's going on globally also. This is the most important thing. And that's why we work very dynamic in changing our ecosystem. Actually, the past 4 or 5 years, we have did radical revamp in our financial and ecosystem in the UAE, and still we are working also in the financial free zones and the stock markets also to look to the legislations and the ecosystem that will help the business to grow in the UAE.
You mentioned something really interesting as well, which is adaptability, and I want to come back to that in just a moment, but I want to maybe make the conversation a bit more global as well and bring in Professor Abukar on this, because when we zoom out globally as well, Professor, it seems right now that even the most advanced economies are still struggling to keep up. I think it's also fair to say that trust in AI regulation, I mean, despite what we're seeing happen here in the UAE, is still quite low, right? So how do you regulate something that learns and self-evolves faster than legislation can be drafted?
Great question. So first of all, it is almost impossible to provide every details in the regulation. Because, for example, in Japan, it takes at least 2 or 3 years to make one law. And 2 or 3 years are like 10 years in the AI industry, even more. So, of course, it is important to make the legislation process faster, but it is also important to make sure that regulation is future-proof. Then how is that possible? One of the approaches will be make it more outcome-based or principle-based rather than rule-based. And this is good because it brings the idea of tech neutrality of regulation. So we have had a long-standing tradition of regulatory tech neutrality, which means that regulation should not specify which technologies to use or not to use to achieve certain regulatory goals. Because what we want to achieve through regulation is not the technology regulation, but to achieve certain values, goals. And those values should be protected or achieved regardless of if you use AI or not. So making regulation more outcome-based, goal-based, principle-based is one of the approaches. Then the question goes, how to fill in the gap between the regulation and practice, or regulation and operation. And here, we might be able to use some soft law tools such as guidance or standards or manuals that should be agreed upon multi-stakeholders, and that should be updated in agile manner. It is much easier to update the soft law compared with hard law. Like the hard law will be created through the legislation process, which takes, again, very long. But if it is just a soft law guidance, it can be updated faster. And also, the good point of soft law is that you don't necessarily comply with the soft law if you can achieve the same level or even better level of regulatory goals. So that allows each business to invent more kind of an innovative compliance method, which could boost innovation. Yeah. So this is a short answer to your question.
Okay, I want to get the private sector perspective on this as well. So you've heard what the professor has just had to say, Jack. Weigh in on this, because Sandbox AQ is really at the bleeding edge of this. You are AI plus quantum. When you look at what's happening with regulation around the world right now, given how fast your company is moving, do you think, hey, okay, that's cute, nice. What's your opinion on this? How are you thinking about the role of regulation given what you're building right now?
Well, Dan, first of all, this is a key topic to discuss right now. This is the moment to really address it. 2 years ago, AI burst on the scene. Many of us have been involved in AI much longer, but it really burst on the scene, particularly for government policymakers. And one point to make about technology, every time there's a new advanced technology, often there's fear. And government policymakers want to make sure they're doing the right thing. They have good intentions and they want to make sure that they don't do anything wrong. But we now have learned over many years that often one of the greatest dangers related to a technology is not that it will be used, that it won't be used. For example, in AI, right here in the UAE and in other countries, we're using AI to help with biopharma, with new drug development, with new medicines, new therapeutics, new diagnostics. In this case, it is more dangerous not to use AI than to use AI, because the old methods have failed. The old methods lead to 15 years of developing a potential drug, 5-7 years of clinical trials, and 85% failure in those trials. So the old way of doing things is actually not successful and has led us to a situation where with Alzheimer's, 40 years of research has given us nothing. We have no medicines for Alzheimer's, for dementia, for pancreatic cancer, for brain cancer. So I think we've now learned things over many years. The professor rightly pointed out, one thing we learned in the 80s, both in the US and in Japan with MITI, is not to choose winners. In the 80s and 90s, many countries, including the US, we tried to pick winners in various technologies, in energy, in semiconductors, and other places, and we failed. And so I think there's a good sense now that we should focus on outcomes, but also let's think of regulation not as control, that's how most people think of regulation, rather as channeling it into applications that we really want to see happen. And I think that's a more fruitful, more productive way of seeing regulation, rather than as a control mechanism to stop something. Let's actually encourage it in the applications we want to see. The second aspect, then, I would want to point out about regulation that we have to be very mindful of is the human capital. In any society, there's relatively few people who are actually driving most of the innovation. In the United States, for example, there's only about 2 million people in the innovation sector driving most of the innovation in Silicon Valley, be it biotech or in tech. We have to be careful of regulation not to in any way discourage people who want to innovate in leaving that country. And I'll just give you one simple example where there's unintended consequences of regulation. In many, many countries in the world, the regulation says that if you get a stock option in a startup, that is the right to buy some shares as an employee in that startup, you are taxed at that moment itself. Even though you've been given no cash, you have no cash in your hand. That small little one line of regulation has discouraged startups in 4 dozen countries around the world. So I think we have to be careful about, I think all countries agree, and UAE is a great example. UAE has put in place environments to encourage startups, to encourage innovation, to think very carefully about wanting the innovation sector to rise. Other countries, we think, have not yet come to the same conclusion, that it's important to look at a totality of regulation, not just the AI regulation, but about startups, about the technology, and most importantly, about making sure we use the AI in appropriate ways, because not using it actually is more dangerous, for example, in pharma.
Just expand on that a little bit more for me. Is there an example you can share of best use case or best practice outside of the UAE on the regulatory front where you're seeing innovation thrive, but within those guardrails?
Well, I think there's many countries who are grappling with this, right? They're definitely grappling with it. And I think that there's 2 things happening simultaneously. One is we see a number of companies and startups and countries really taking the lead in terms of AI and now also in quantum. And I hope this will be a little time to discuss quantum because it is really coming very, very fast. At the same time, there's a reaction by many countries to say, wait a second, where is my ability to be independent and to have my own sovereign compute, my own sovereign AI? And Rachel and others have done incredible work to state the case for making sure that countries and continents even have the ability to control their destiny. So I think that there's a tension that is being engaged with right now. It's a real tension. It's one that we can discuss here today. I think in addition to the UAE, we see countries like Singapore as an example, like Israel and others, really wanted to make sure that they encourage the entrepreneurial sector. And when I say entrepreneurial sector, Dan, I'm not just referring to about little startups. I'm talking about entrepreneurs also in big companies, in governments as well. One thing I've seen happen in the UAE more than most other places is that government workers see themselves as entrepreneurs. In the US, we don't really have that. I wish we did, but we don't. And so I think encouraging that is fundamental if we're going to really adopt these technologies in a very productive way rather than seeing regulation as control.
Okay, very interesting. We'll come back to that as well. Rachel, wanted to bring you in here too because your work focuses on the global governance of AI. Is a one-size-fits-all model essentially the best way to move forward, or are we seeing these patchwork regulatory actions at a country-by-country level actually delivering the most effective solution for building out the case for innovation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tricky question, and it depends what you're trying to regulate. There's a significant difference between AI governance that might be what governments are putting in place to encourage and enable the growth of AI ecosystems within their country, and then the responsibility of governments to put safeguards in place to protect people whose rights might be at risk. So I think there's a couple of different layers here. And I think one of the questions we need to be asking is who needs to be regulated? We know we don't want to be regulating or putting too large a compliance burden on local, small innovators who we want to break out into the markets. But we know we also want to be creating fair markets, and we want to be ensuring that there isn't dominance of particular players in particular areas. So I think global governance is important when we're dealing with global issues. So we're dealing with big tech companies that are able to do one thing in one part of the world, so have really sophisticated, well-resourced content moderation for the English language in the United States, but at the same time don't provide the same kind of resourcing, safeguarding, monitoring and moderation in other parts of the world. This is a failure, and this is where countries alone probably will not be able to regulate this kind of thing on their own. On the kind of policy side and the enabling side, global governance is important for when you want to promote cooperation on building kind of AI global commons and thinking about how do we share access to infrastructure. Computer's not going to be something that's owned by everyone. It's so expensive. How do we share access to critical data sets? So this is where we want interoperable governance frameworks that's going to allow different countries to be able to share and enable that kind of cross-border innovation.
It's interesting because, as Her Excellency was explaining, the UAE is also driven by a moral guidance, a moral obligation here. Do other nations necessarily have that same approach?
Well, we led a study called the Global Index on Responsible AI that measured country-level commitments and practices to responsible AI in 138 countries and jurisdictions. And out of a total of 100, the average global score was 18. So the finding was that at the moment, and the IMF have a similar kind of index, but at the moment, the majority of people around the world are living without adequate protection for the kinds of human rights related risks that AI may pose. So at the moment, AI ethics is a set of principles that are not necessarily being realized.
Okay, so let's open it up here because I think we're touching on something that's really interesting, and you've mentioned it. Who should essentially be leading on these guardrails now? Is it governments, is it companies, or should it be a shared model overall? Your Excellency, do you want to speak to that first?
I think it is something you have to look to it as co-design between all the stakeholders. It's not one. It's not only the government. It was an old statements when we say the government will do the legislations. It's not anymore adaptable for this region. We have to work with all our stakeholders. We have to work to understand, to listen to them. And that's why we revamp our legislations. If you don't do that ecosystem in your country, the people will not stay because the global is moving around and the changes in the technology, the concepts, the policies are evolving everywhere in the world. That's why you need to build that ecosystem that is adaptable to all the changes around you and bring everyone with you. And that's why in the UAE, we have a platform where all our legislations inside it, It is, you can access to it more than 30 language. You can search for anything. This is to ensure that our legislation ecosystem is very transparent to the whole people are living in the UAE. Any comments they have on any legislations, any challenges they have it, they can immediately feed back the government and we consider it. 90% of the requirements of our stakeholders in the UAE has been considered in the revamp of our legislation ecosystem. And this is how we keep ourselves relevant, up to date with the emerging technologies, the whole world around us in the world. The other thing that we are working with the WIF now to build in a project called GRIP, which is a global regulatory innovation platform, where we invite all the countries to put their practices, to their experiences inside this platform. We dialogue together, and the same thing, we have also to assess our readiness to build that ecosystem that will help the UAE and the other countries, not only us, to have an ecosystem that is relevant to everyone. And this is actually what is happening in the UAE. I will give you more example, Dan, if you allow me, how we interpret AI in the legislations in the UAE, if I have enough time and you don't have other questions. Late this year, the UAE government have launched the first project for how to introduce AI in the legislation ecosystem. And when we do that one, actually, the first thing that comes to the mind of everyone, well, ChatGPT now can draft any law. ChatGPT, if you give him the right prompts, it will go, and it has all the link to all the international trends and sources. It will bring for you the best law that you want. Is it relevant or not relevant? Whatever we are thinking in the AI project in the UAE, in our legislation ecosystem, is not how to draft legislations. It's not anymore a challenge in the UAE. Anyone can do that one. AI can do that one. Actually, we are building an AI ecosystem that is linked to all the sources, international and local, all the legislation that we have it on the federal level and into local level. It is linked to the social media. So whenever people, our stakeholders, talk about any challenge they have, the system itself will alert the government. People are talking about that challenge, and in specific, they are looking about that clause or that article in that law. We want to reach to that level of integration AI in our ecosystem. It will link to the services that we are providing to our customers. For example, if you are granting any license to any investor, and the people in the front line, they're asking more requirement. And the law doesn't say that one, okay? So we are knowing that the people at the implementation of the law in the field is not exactly what is in the law. We need that AI tool to detect for us, based on the international trend, if there is any duplicate in our law, if there is any article which is outdated. So it will tell us. If we did any change in any law, the AI tool will tell us, because it is like cohesive system, will tell us, if you did that change in that article, you have to always remember that that article is linked to this article in different laws. So when you do the change in this law, you have to do the changes in the other law. So it will keep us always updated. This is how we look to the AI in legislation in the UAE. We want it to be real life feedback from our stakeholders, and the same thing to measure for us the impact of our regulations in the UAE.
And if I could just build on the minister's statements, and back to your question also, I think we have to really grapple the fact that AI is just at the very beginning. As much as we think it's already quite advanced, and it has already had quite an impact, Governments are using it. People are using it personally. I know many friends who are using it as their therapists now, and they're talking to AIs as their therapists. But it's actually at the very beginning. I'll just give you one concrete example. Right now in this room, as far as I know, we're all humans in this room. But 4 or 5 years from now, at this very room, when we have a Global Leadership Futures
Machines.
Council of the WEF in the UAE, we're going to have humanoid robots in this room.
Machines, yeah.
Yeah, there'll be robots. They'll be sitting on a chair. They'll be taking notes or doing other things, and we're going to have to grapple with this as governments, as regulators, and as companies. We're going to say, look, there's a lot of positive that can come from these humanoid robots. An example again would be as people get older, instead of having them go to a nursing home or other kinds of places, they can stay in their homes. They can be cared for by a robot. I think we all think this is a very positive thing, but at the same time, introducing humanoid walking, talking robots in our society is going to be a much bigger shock than any ChatGPT that we've now engaged with. This is going to be a very big shock to the system as we now have them enter into society. That's only 4 or 5 years away. And so to the minister's point about how do you make sure that a regulation itself has the generative capacity to update itself to the outcome basis that the professor talked about, rather than specifics, let's talk about outcomes. One thing that we recommend building into regulation is the ability to convene, because one of the powers of government that is the strongest, but most underused, is the power of convening. And one way to make sure there's a level playing field for all players in a field is for the government to convene the players, to listen to them, and to keep a process that in the regulation itself, it says, every 6 months or something like that, there shall be a convening of the key stakeholders, and we shall update it. Put that into the regulation itself to recognize that any robot law we say today is irrelevant 4 or 5 years from now. And that law 4 or 5 years from now is irrelevant 10 years from now. And the same thing with AI, the same thing with quantum and other areas. Let's build in the ability to update itself into the very regulation itself.
Anything further to add on this side, Professor?
So first of all, I cannot agree more to Her Excellency when you said about ethics should be led not by a single stakeholder, but multi-stakeholder, because ethics is originally like that. So, and on top of that, there is no single correct ethics. So each culture, each nation, each region has its own values and ethics. And even though we pursue the interoperable regulations, it is not the right approach to try to make uniform regulation all over the world. And that is why Japanese government is pursuing for interoperability, but not the hegemony of certain values. And one of the very interesting example is that, for example, the EU's AI Act says that AI system that interferes humans' emotion or that conducts a remote biometric recognition is a high risk. And I think there is a concept that AI is evaluating humans are high risk. But in Japan, we don't have that kind of regulation or regulatory scope because we are more used to the concept that robots coexist with human beings. So if there's any risk, that is a risk that should be regulated regardless if this is posed by human beings or robots. And there is no discussion about which is better, which is bad. It's just the cultural differences. So that is why I believe that each culture's value should be respected. But on top of that, there's a lot of rooms for collaboration. For example, even though our goals are different, but still we can agree on certain process of risk management, or how to evaluate data quality, or how to evaluate a algorithm accuracy. And so, like having the same stick, measuring stick, even though our acceptable risk level are different from country to country.
And can I just say that back to the professor's point, Japan, I predict, will be one of the societies that best uses robots because they've been preparing their society for 40 years. That because they have an aging society with fewer childbearing, right, they're below the 2.1, they see robots as part of the solution. Not as a danger, but part of the solution. And Japan has put in place regulations that make sure that robots are safe to be around.
Yes.
And that when you develop a robot, you must meet certain standards so that the robot will not move wildly and things like this. So I think that there's examples around the world where we can anticipate future technologies, not just wait till they come, but actually anticipate before they come so we can get society ready for these.
Maybe I can offer a slightly different perspective because I come from South Africa, where when you talk about robots, everybody's immediately worried and scared. They are scared about job displacements
Yes.
in particular, and I don't think we've necessarily meaningfully answered that question. We conducted a public perception survey in South Africa where, first of all, it showed that 1/3 of South Africans have never heard of AI. Another third of South Africans have heard of the concept but have no idea what it is. That means 2/3 of society have no meaningful grasp of AI. So if we're talking about that kind of context where you have very low levels of understanding and AI literacy, and then we're talking about a context where in the future AI may not just regulate itself but regulate all of society, there are some fundamental questions that need to be answered about democratic values. Lawmaking is slow, deliberately so that we have meaningful public participation and we have meaningful deliberation and we think through the various consequences. Now, I certainly think we need to think about more outcomes-based regulation and regulatory sandboxes and the ways in which AI regulation can itself become iterative, regulation can itself learn, but I also think we need to be thinking very carefully about how do we build the capacity of existing institutions of democracy that serve a very, very crucial role in preserving democratic values as society moves forward with these technologies. And if you allow me, I'll give a very quick example, again from South Africa. I'm sorry for all the South African examples, but in South Africa, our Competitions Commission recently undertook a 16-month inquiry, a media inquiry, because they were concerned about how people are accessing information and news online and the dominance of digital platforms. And they found that global news platforms and particularly the search engines online were algorithmically biased towards global news outlets and global news sources and deprioritizing local news sources, which was resulting in a lack of diversity in terms of what people knew about their country. So in a country where so few people have a kind of good AI literacy, this is really kind of concerning around the enjoyment of democratic and constitutional values, but it does show the important role that democratic institutions in many parts of the world are playing.
Very interesting. Jack, can I have you pick up on that as well? Because one of the things you spoke about earlier is the impact of all of this. And as a product builder yourself, how do you think about the impact of the technology that you're creating on societies and to the point here on democracy as well?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that, we've had a tradition in general societies that when you are a leader in a particular field, you also have a responsibility. When we first started giving licenses to TV stations, we're on TV right here, there was built into that license an obligation for also using those channels and spectrum for education. And for that reason, we have a number of channels that actually are dedicated to that. I would propose, and we've now tried to get this going, that those of us who make this AI, those of us who are responsible for putting it out there, also have a responsibility for education, for sharing, for getting this out there in a more open way. And I think that we should not wait for the government to give us this, mandate this responsibility, but we should eagerly, proactively want this responsibility because it will benefit all of society. And I think, Rachel, you point to a very, very key area of challenge, that when new technology comes, it is not spread like peanut butter evenly across society. It is very uneven, very lumpy in terms of how people can adopt it in different ways. A number of us here in this room, I see some friends, were very involved in digital access over the past 20 years. The fact that there were have and have-nots, the digital divide. And only now, 25 years later, are we finally closing the digital divide. We've talked about the fact that many people in the world were outside the realm of having access to digital smartphones, to high bandwidth and things like that. And we talked about it, and we did some things, and only now are we now finally coming to the edge of the end of the digital divide? I don't want to see the same thing happen with AI, where we have an AI divide for 25 years. We can learn from the mistakes that, and I'll just say for myself, that we made in the digital divide era. And we're down to now the last 1.5 billion people in our planet who don't have access to the same kind of bandwidth and phones that many of us do. And that will be closed in the next 36, 48 months. India is an example where Jio, the service, is now giving away 600 million phones at very low cost, which will help to close that final divide. I think that we have an obligation as producers of the technology to offer education, to pay for even this kind of access, to make sure that people can say, I have a good sense of what this technology is. And also, to the point which I think you made, how do we give people the empowerment to make decisions explicitly, not force it on them, but make explicit decisions? Where do they want AI in their lives, and where do they not want AI in their lives? And I think the danger I see right now is that we're going to slip AI into so many different places that we won't be aware. So I think transparency about how we're using AI is critical to that as well.
Professor, you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing we have to all agree on is that we cannot keep one set of values or mindset forever. For example, we have had a long tradition of freedom of expression. So government was supposed not to intervene any expressions in the market because humans are wise, and if there is a free market of expression, then we can make a better choice. But it's already a myth because we've seen a lot of cases where algorithms divide people, and once you're categorized certain group, then you will see only the part of the information to decide democratic decisions. So human beings are not so smart to make their own decisions without any interference by others. So it is important to note that we need some kind of guidance to make people know a lot of information, diverse information. So likewise, it is important the government to balance different values, to set the line of acceptable risk levels, and always try to update the acceptance risk level for each AI system. So we need to learn from the society and practice and how to manage the newly happening risks.
So we've spoken a lot about what's happening on the innovation track, on the regulatory track. I want to just quickly talk about, before we wrap this up, what concerns all of you the most about where we stand right now, and if there is anything that is keeping you awake at night as we ponder these questions. One thing that I think about quite deeply is the fact that recent studies have shown, given the rise of ChatGPT, the increasing use of these artificial intelligence chatbots, for example, and other AI tools, that humans are now losing their ability to think critically and creatively. The loss of human consciousness is probably something that concerns me the most. And of course, when you look at the regulatory angle of this as well, this is something that regulation cannot necessarily touch. So what keeps you awake at night as you ponder these issues? Your Excellency, I want to finish on you, so Jack, I'll go to you first.
Two things keep me up at night, and I did not get much sleep last night, it's true, partly because of these issues. One is on the education level, and this goes to the critical thinking, but it also goes again to, we have an obligation, knowing that this technology is very powerful, in a positive way, to finally address some of the issues we've had in education, where I took a year off of work and I went on a listening tour to go visit schools around the country and around the world that were doing things that are innovative, things that were outside the bounds of what normally schools do. Very recently, I went and took a trip to Austin, Texas to look at the Alpha School. The Alpha School is using AI in a very different way, and I'll leave it to folks watching this. They can look it up and see what's happening there. What I saw on the ground is that kids K through 12 can engage in AI in a personalized journey so they can learn in their own way, be it more video, be it more text, be it auditory, different modalities, and in their own time and pace so that they're not forced into one rubric in terms of how we all went to school. I think there's a positive way to use AI to help with education. I think education is one of the biggest crises, certainly in the United States. We have failed, completely failed, in the United States in our education system. We're number 40 and 41, respectively, in the PISA scores internationally. Almost every country represented in this room is above us, compared to the US in education. So I'm very concerned about the ability to use use AI in education. The second thing that concerns me is AI and the cyber attacks. And Dan, you and I have talked about this. As much as it's great to use AI in some contexts, it also means you're more exposed to different kinds of attacks. And as we use AI, we have to be mindful of this, that we're not opening our society up to even greater hacks than we were before. 80% of companies now have adopted AI in some major way, but only 6% have a security plan for their AI. And that's a very, very big delta. I would have imagined that would be a smaller delta at this point because people would be aware. But in fact, we're going to see more and more attacks because of the AI route to get in. While each of us try to protect our passwords and logins, there's now more machines that log into our networks than there are humans. Those machines each have a login. We have to think about the fact that AI is now interacting on the internet more than humans are. And so I really worry about that we have not embraced this risk enough, and we need to address that. So education and cyber risk are the two things I worry about right now.
Rachel, next to you.
Yeah, well, I have written a book on AI and the future of global inequality. So this is my big concern, is that the benefits and opportunities of AI are not equally distributed, and that people across the global south bear the brunt of the harms. So I think one thing we have not really touched on today is the harms within the AI value and supply chains. The humans that are behind the cleaning of the data, that are labeling the data, that are involved in human reinforcement learning in conditions that are really, really appalling. So I think that is an area that's not going to be solved through a good AI regulation, and it's going to need global cooperation.
Professor?
To me, the highest risk is that not to use AI. Then this connects to the discussion of digital divide. And to use more AI, first of all, existing regulation should be updated to make it possible to comply with the AI system. But also, in the future, I believe that it is necessary to realize environment where robots can do high-risk services such as legal advice or financial advice or healthcare advice without human supervision. Because as long as you mandate that humans should monitor everything for high-risk activities by AI, then we will confine the ability of AI systems in the human ability. So if we try to achieve that, and especially in Japanese context, we lost 900,000 populations last year only. So we need to make use of AI, not only for daily use, but also for high-risk purposes. And existing regulation cannot allow so far the high-risk conduct of AI systems without human intervention or human supervision, but we need seriously to discuss what governance mechanisms should be embedded to ensure that AI can do more high-risk activities.
Your Excellency, I'll give you the final word. Bring it home for us, wrap it all together, and what is your answer to the question of what's keeping you awake at night right now?
Actually, nothing. Who knows me, he knows that I'm a very risk-taker person. However, I might agree on the perspective of using AI, especially in the education, and maybe our students at a stage will lose their innovation and talent. However, we should be, as a countries, ready for the AI. AI is coming. We have to be ready for it. And that's why the good approach of each country is to put all the precautions of how to use AI. AI, at the end of the day, is a very powerful tool that it will save a lot of our times in searching a lot of data. Use it, but we have to make the balance, okay? And the same thing, we have to move gradually. So we need to put human in command of the AI, especially at the early stages. And think from now, all the countries that are using AI, like Charles Shishi was saying, that what are the opportunities for our people to find other jobs whenever the AI will take some of our jobs. And this is all the plans of any countries. And this is actually what UAE is doing. In the Ministry of Education, they are doing a lot of efforts of how to introduce AI, okay, in the school, but the same thing, not to lose the talent of our children at the same time.
Well, I think we'll end it on that note. Your Excellency, I want to say thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining us today. Thank you to all of my panelists, and to those of you joining in the room and also watching us online, on behalf of CNBC and the World Economic Forum, thank you for being here.